Part 1, The Second Chance. The rain poured in heavy sheets, drumming against the roof like an urgent warning. The dim hospital room was silent, except for the rhythmic beeping of the monitor beside my bed. I was dying. I knew it. Yet, no one cared. I clutched the cold, wrinkled diagnosis slip in my trembling hands. Terminal cancer. A cruel joke by fate. As I lay there, weak and forgotten, I could hear their voices just outside my door. My husband, Ryan Carter, whispering in a hushed yet firm tone. Lily, don't cry. His voice was gentle, soothing. I'll take care of everything. She doesn't love you, Ryan, Lily Shaw's delicate, tearful voice responded. She never did. She's only holding on to you out of selfishness. My fingers tightened around the blanket. They thought I was asleep. They thought I didn't hear. Even my daughter, my own flesh and blood, stood in the hallway, her voice laced with resentment. Mom, why won't you just let go? Why can't you see that Dad belongs with Aun? Ty Lily? Auntie Lily. The woman who had stolen everything from me. My husband, my home, my daughter. My breath rattled in my chest as I forced myself to sit up. My body felt like a hollow shell, my strength all but drained. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask, why? Why did no one care that I was the one who had given up everything for them? Why was I the villain in their story? But in the end, I said nothing. I was too tired. Too broken. So I simply closed my eyes and let the darkness take me. And then I woke up. A second chance. The familiar scent of ink and old paper filled my nose. Sunlight filtered through the wooden shutters, casting golden patterns across my desk. The weight of a pen rested in my fingers. I gasped. The cold, sterile walls of the hospital were gone. The weight of sickness, of impending death, had vanished. My body felt light, strong. My hands, no longer skeletal and weak, clenched into fists. I knew this room. I knew this day. This was the moment Ryan had asked me to give up my job for Lily. I had returned. I had been reborn. My breath came fast and uneven. My heart pounded against my ribs. The memories of my past life rushed in like a raging flood, filling me with equal parts terror and fury. The betrayal. The loneliness. The regret. I had sacrificed everything, my career, my happiness, even my dignity, to be the perfect wife, the perfect mother. And for what? To die alone, hated and unwanted? Not this time. This time I would not live for Ryan Carter. I would not live for Lily Shaw. I would live for myself. Breaking free. Director, I'd like to give my job to someone else in greater need. My voice was steady, unwavering. Director Wilson, the head of my department, froze in place, his pen hovering mid-air. What? I smiled, calm and composed. I want to respond to the call for free love, Director. Arranged marriages belong in the past. As the daughter of martyrs, I should set an example. Director Wilson's lips parted slightly in surprise. But, didn't your fiancé ask you to give this job to Lily Shaw? In my past life, this was the moment I had blindly obeyed. I had handed over my hard-earned position, sacrificing my own future just to please Ryan. I had smiled and nodded, telling myself that love meant compromise. But now, I knew better. I've thought about it carefully, I said smoothly. And I believe someone else might this position more. Wilson studied me, clearly shocked. Then, slowly, he nodded. I must say, your sense of duty is admirable." He clapped his hands together, his expression one of admiration. "Truly, a woman of great vision." I fought the urge to laugh. If only he knew. With a firm stroke, I signed the paperwork. It was official. I had chosen my own path. I was going to the countryside. Not as a punishment. Not as a sacrifice. But as an escape. As a new beginning. The unraveling. The apartment was eerily silent as I packed my bags. This was the place Ryan and I were supposed to live in after our wedding. A home that was never truly mine. I touched the empty ring box on the dresser, remembering how desperately I had clung to my role as his wife in my past life. How I had endured every humiliation, every whispered conversation about how I wasn't good enough. Not anymore. A knock at the door made my fingers still. I turned, already knowing who it was. Ryan stood in the doorway, his sharp military uniform perfectly pressed. His dark eyes, always so unreadable, studied me with quiet concern. "You're home early," he said. I forced a small smile. "I finished work early." Ryan hesitated. "Have you thought about what I asked?" I already knew what he meant. He wanted me to quit my job. He wanted me to step aside for Lily. In my past life, I had nodded without hesitation. I had believed that by sacrificing myself, I was proving my love. This time, I lifted my chin and met his gaze. "Yes," I said. "I've decided." His shoulders relaxed slightly, relief flashing across his face. "Good." "I'm going to the countryside," I added. Ryan stiffened. "What?" "I applied for a transfer. I leave in 2 days." His brows drew together. "Why?" I shrugged. "Because I want to." Silence stretched between us. For the first time, Ryan looked unsettled. As if he hadn't expected this response. "You didn't discuss this with me." "I didn't think I'd too." Ryan's jaw tensed. "You're my fiancé." I smiled. "Am I?" The words hit their mark. Ryan's expression darkened. "What are you saying?" I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "You wanted me to give up my career for Lily. You wanted me to move aside, to make space for her." I tilted my head. "Tell me, Ryan. If I'm truly your fiancé, why am I the one being asked to leave?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. Because we both knew the truth. In his heart, he had already chosen Lily Shaw. And this time, I would let him have her. I turned back to my suitcase, calmly folding my last piece of clothing. "You don't have to worry about me anymore, Ryan. I won't stand in your way." The words were supposed to be freeing, but when I glanced up, I saw something unexpected flicker across his face. Panic. Ryan Carter had never been afraid of losing me before. And yet, for the first time, he looked afraid now. Part 2, the chains begin to break. The morning sun poured through the windows, casting golden streaks across the wooden floor. My suitcase stood by the door, packed and ready. A symbol of my newfound freedom. But before I could leave, I had one last thing to do. I had to meet Ryan's parents. A visit to the Carter family. The Carter estate was exactly as I remembered it, elegant, grand, and suffocating. The scent of polished wooden, fresh flowers filled the air as I stepped inside, memories clawing their way back. This was where I had spent years trying to belong. Where I had smiled, nodded, and played the role of the perfect wife. Never again. Uncle Carter, a man of strict principles, was seated at the dining table with a newspaper in hand. His wife, Aunt Carter, bustled about, fussing over tea and snacks. When they saw me, their faces lit up with warmth. "Mia, sweetheart." Aunt Carter rushed forward, clasping my hand. DS in hers. "You're finally home. You should visit more often." Guilt settled in my chest. They were the only ones in this family who had ever truly cared for me. But their love had always come second to Ryan's wishes. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "Uncle, Aunt. I need to talk to you." Something in my tone made them pause. Uncle Carter put down his newspaper, his sharp gaze locking onto mine. "What is it, child?" I swallowed, then spoke the words I had longed to say. "I want to cancel my engagement with Ryan." The room fell into silence. Aunt Carter's face paled. Her grip on my hands tightened. "Sweetheart, what are you saying?" Uncle Carter's expression darkened. "Did Ryan do something to you?" I hesitated. If I told them the truth, that Ryan had always loved another woman, that I had spent my past life as nothing more than a placeholder, would they believe me? No. I had no proof. No evidence. So I simply said, "We're not right for each other." Aunt Carter's hands trembled. "Mia, dear, you know Ryan is a good man. If there's a problem, we can fix it." I smiled softly, shaking my head. "Aunt, love can't be forced. And I won't live my life as someone's second choice." Her lips parted, but no words came out. For the first time in my life, I saw something other than pity in their eyes. I saw respect. Uncle Carter sighed heavily, rubbing his temple. "If this is truly what you want, he turned to his wife. "We must support her." Aunt Carter's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. She understood. Within the hour, the necessary papers were signed, the engagement formally annulled. The weight on my chest lifted. I was free. A cruel welcome home. By the time I returned to my apartment, the sun had begun to set, painting the sky in hues of crimson and gold. I expected silence. Instead, I was met with laughter. Not mine. Theirs. Ryan's voice, deep and familiar, echoed through the house. "Noah, slow down before you break something." Lily's soft, delicate laughter followed. "Oh, Ryan, let him play. He's just a child." My stomach twisted. I stepped inside, my fingers clenching into fists as I took in the scene before me. Lily and her son Noah were comfortably settled in my home. Ryan sat beside them, an affectionate smile on his face. Noah, her child, not mine, was curled up on the couch, flipping through a book as if he belonged here. And then, the final insult. My suitcase had been shoved to the side, my belongings packed away as if I had already been erased. Lily turned to me with a sickeningly sweet smile. "Sister, welcome back. We were just talking about you." I felt something cold crawl up my spine. Sister. She always called me that. As if we were equals. As if she wasn't actively taking everything that was supposed to be mine. Ryan, oblivious to the tension, stood up. "Mia, I was just tellin' Lily that will help her get settled for a few days. She's been struggling, and I figured." I cut him off. "Ryan." He blinked at the sharpness in my voice. I tilted my head, forcing a small smile. "Where am I supposed to stay?" He frowned slightly. "Well, I was thinking you could move into my room." My stomach twisted with disgust. He had already made his decision. He had already chosen them over me. I exhaled, stepping forward. I could feel Lily's watchful gaze on me, waiting to see how I would react. For a moment, the old me, the weak, desperate woman who would do anything for Ryan, wanted to scream. Wanted to beg him to see me. To choose me. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I turned on my heel and strode to my room. Lily barely had time to step aside as I threw open the door. And there it was. The ultimate betrayal. Lily's clothes hung in my closet. Her perfume lingered in the air. Her son's toys were scattered across the floor. They had taken over my space. I let out a slow breath, my hands trembling. "Ryan," I called out, my voice eerily calm. He appeared in the doorway. "Mia, listen. Get out." His brows furrowed. "What?" I turned to face him fully, my expression blank. "Get out." Ryan's lips parted, confusion flashing in his eyes. "Mia, you're overreacting." "Overreacting." Of course. I clenched my fists. "You brought another woman into my home. You let her take my space, my things, without even asking me. And now you expect me to just move in to your room like a backup plan?" His jaw tightened. "Lily has nowhere else to go. She has you," I snapped. Ryan flinched. I took a step closer, voice lowering. "She has always had you. And that's fine. But don't you dare pretend I matter to you when you've never treated me as anything more than an obstacle." A tense silence filled the room. Lily, sensing the shift in the air, quickly stood up. "Ryan, maybe we should stay out of this," I cut her off sharply. For once, she obeyed. Ryan sighed, pinching the bridge of his N. "Os. Mia, don't make this difficult." I let out a bitter laugh. "Difficult?" I echoed. "Ryan, I cancelled the engagement." His head snapped up. I crossed my arms, watching as realization dawned in his eyes. "I met with your parents today. The paperwork is signed." The color drained from his face. For the first time, Ryan Carter looked afraid. "Mia." I stepped past him, picking up my suitcase. "I won't fight for something that was never mine," I murmured. "Congratulations, Ryan. You're free to love Lily." I expected relief in his expression. Instead, I saw something else. Panic. But it was too late. I had already chosen my future. And it didn't include him. A new beginning. The night air was cool as I walked away from the apartment, my suitcase rolling behind me. With every step, the chains that had bound me for so long shattered. I was no longer Ryan Carter's fiancée. I was no longer bound to a love that had never been mine. I was free. And for the first time in 2 lifetimes, I smiled. Part 3, A Road to Freedom. The night air was crisp, carrying with it the faint scent of damp earth and the distant hum of city life. As I stepped out of the apartment for the last time, suitcase in hand, I felt a strange sense of weightlessness. I was free. Free from Ryan Carter. Free from his suffocating kindness. Free from Lily Shaw's soft-spoken deception. But freedom was terrifying. I had nowhere to go. No real plan other than my transfer to the countryside. I had cut ties with the only home I had ever known. And yet, for the first time, I wasn't afraid. I was alive. A visit from the past. I arrived at the small guest house late at night. It was nothing special, just a modest room with a bed, a wooden table, and a rickety chair. The kind of place no one would come looking for me. Or so I thought. Because at dawn, there was a knock at my door. A sharp, urgent knock. I sighed, setting down my tea before walking over. The moment I opened the door, I found myself face to face with the last person I wanted to see. Ryan Carter. His hair was slightly disheveled, and his uniform was still crisp but noticeably wrinkled, as if he had slept in it. His eyes, so dark, so unreadable, held something I couldn't quite place. "Good morning, Mia." I folded my arms. "What do you want?" He hesitated, as if struggling to find the right words. Finally, he let out a breath. "Come home." I blinked, then let out a short, sharp laugh. "Home?" Ryan stepped forward, his gaze locking onto mine. "You left in the middle of the night. Do you know how reckless that was?" His voice was tight, controlled, but there was something beneath it, something raw. I tilted my head. "You seemed fine with kicking me out of my own room. What's changed?" He stiffened. "I didn't kick you out." I gave him a flat stare. Ryan exhaled, his jaw clenching. "Mia, you're being unreasonable." I in. "Oh, you're upset, but Lily." "I don't want to hear about Lily," I cut him off coldly. He fell silent. For a moment, we simply stood there, the air between us thick with words unspoken. Then, he tried again. "We're getting married." I smirked. "No, Ryan. We're not." His face paled. "My parents. They agreed." The words were like a gunshot. His breath caught, his entire body tensing. "You're lying," he said, almost like a plea. I shook my head. "Go home, Ryan." His lips parted, but before he could speak, a small voice echoed from behind him. "Dad?" I looked past Ryan. "Noah." The child stood there, rubbing his sleepy eyes, his tiny hands clutching at the fabric of his oversized coat. He looked up at Ryan, then at me. And then, with all the innocence of a child, he asked, "Why doesn't Auntie like us?" The words sent a chill down my spine. Not "Why doesn't Auntie like me?" "Why doesn't Auntie like us?" I turned to Ryan, but he was already kneeling down, cup pin. Noah's face in his hands. "Noah, that's not true. Auntie Mia isn't mad at you." Noah sniffled. "But, she left." Ryan sighed, brushing his hand through the boy's hair. My fingers curled at my sides. I had nothing against Noah. He was just a child, innocent in all of this. But he wasn't mine. And he never would be. I turned to Ryan. "Go home." He looked at me, his grip tightening on Noah's shoulders. "Mia." I shook my head. "I mean it, Ryan." For a long moment, he just stood there, staring. At me as if seeing me for the first time. As if realizing, finally, that I meant it. That I wasn't coming back. With a long exhale, he turned away. "Come on, Noah." The boy hesitated, looking back at me once more before allowing Ryan to take his hand. They disappeared down the hall. And I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The final goodbye. That morning, I boarded the train to the countryside. The rhythmic hum of the tracks, the soft murmur of passengers, it was all so different. From the suffocating silence of the life I had left behind. I watched the city fade into the distance, the buildings growing smaller and smaller until they were nothing more than a memory. And with them, I left behind the ghost of the woman I used to be. I had spent an entire lifetime sacrificing myself for people who had never truly seen me. but no more. I was done being the shadow of someone else's happiness. Now, I would carve my own path. For myself. For my future. For the life I had never gotten to live. As the train carried me toward my new beginning, I closed my eyes and whispered the words that had been trapped in my heart for far too long. Goodbye, Ryan Carter. Part 4, A Life of My Own. The train rattled along the tracks, cutting through vast fields of green that stretched as far as the eye could see. The city, with all its noise, betrayals, and heartbreak, was now nothing more than a fading blur in the distance. I leaned my head against the wind. Exhaling slowly. I was finally free. And yet, a small part of me still felt unsettled. Because freedom also meant stepping into the unknown. For the first time in my life, there was no one dictating my path. No arranged marriage. No suffocating expectations. No Ryan Carter or Lily Shaw lurking in the shadows of my life. It was exhilarating. And terrifying. But as the wind rushed past, carrying the scent of fresh soil and open air, I told myself one thing. I would never look back. A new world. By the time the train reached my destination, the sun was already dipping below the horizon. I stepped off onto the dusty platform, my suitcase in one hand and a small bag slung over my shoulder. The countryside was exactly as I had imagined, vast, quiet, untouched by the complications of city life. The air was fresher here, the people moving at a slower, steadier pace. I took a deep breath. This was where my new life would begin. A small group of officials from the local commune ITY center had been sent to welcome me. One of them, a kind-looking older man with a weathered face and a warm smile, introduced himself as Director Wong. "You must be Mia," he said, offering a handshake. "We're honored to have you here." I smiled, shaking his hand firmly. "Thank you for having me." "The work here is tough," he warned. "It's nothing like the city." "Are you sure you're ready for this?" I met his gaze without hesitation. I wouldn't have come if I wasn't ready. Director Wong studied me for a moment, then nodded approvingly. "Good. That's the kind of spirit we need." He motioned for me to follow him, and together, we made our way toward the village. The path was lined with small houses made of wood and clay, their roofs thatched with straw. Children ran barefoot through the fields, their laughter echoing in the open air. Women carried baskets of freshly picked vegetables, chatting amongst themselves. It was so different from the life I had known. But for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. Meeting a legend. Director Wong led me to a small house at the far end of the village. "This is where you'll be staying," he said, unlocking the door. The house was simple, just a bed, a wooden table, and a small kitchen. But it was mine. A place that belonged to no one but me. As I stepped inside, Director Wong continued, "Tomorrow morning, I'll introduce you to Professor Michael Fong. He's a leading expert in agricultural research. You'll be working under him." I paused. Professor Michael Fong? In my past life, I had read about him in the newspapers. He was one of the most brilliant minds in agricultural science, known for his groundbreaking work in soil enrichment and sustainable farming. A man who had revolutionized farming techniques. And I was going to work with him? I swallowed, excitement bubbling inside me. "I'd be honored," I said sincerely. Director Wong chuckled. "You'll learn a lot from him. He's strict, but fair. Just don't let his gruff exterior scare you off." I smiled. "I think I can handle it." He gave me a final nod before leaving me to settle in. As I unpacked my bag, I thought back to my past life. How different would everything have been if I had come here sooner? If I had never married Ryan Carter? If I had chosen to live for myself instead of sacrificing everything for a man who had never truly seen me? But there was no point in wondering. I was here now. And that was all that mattered. First day, first challenge. The next morning, I was up before dawn. The village was already alive with activity, farmers tending to their fields, women preparing food over open fires, children running barefoot through the dirt roads. I made my way to the research center, a modest building surrounded by vast farmland. Inside, I found Professor Michael Fong hunched over a set of documents, his silver hair tousled, his sharp eyes scanning the pages with intense focus. Without looking. "Gee up," he asked, "you must be the new assistant." "Yes, sir," I replied. He finally glanced at me, his gaze assessing. "Have you worked in agriculture before?" "Not formally, but I'm a fast learner." He snorted. "We'll see about that." Without another word, he handed me a stack of books. "Read these. You have 1 week to finish them." I blinked. "All of them?" "Unless you want to be useless here." I fought the urge to laugh. He reminded me of a grumpy old general, strict, no nonsense, but brilliant. And I liked that. "I'll finish them," I said firmly. He smirked. "Good. Now, get to work. The past comes knocking." The next few weeks flew by in a blur. I immersed myself in my studies, working alongside Professor Fong in the fields, learning everything I could about soil conditions, irrigation, and sustainable farming. For the first time in 2 lifetimes, I felt truly alive. Until one afternoon, when I received an unexpected letter. The handwriting was familiar. Too familiar. Ryan Carter. My hands clenched around the paper, my pulse quickening. I hesitated, then opened it. "Mia. I know you don't want to hear from me, but I need to see you. Just once. Please. Ryan." I stared at the words, my mind racing. What could he possibly have to say? He had made his choice. He had let me walk away. So why now? I folded the letter and placed it aside. I had no intention of responding. But deep down, I knew. Ryan Carter wasn't done with me yet. The unexpected visitor. A few days later, just as the sun was setting, I spotted a familiar figure standing at the entrance of the research center. Ryan Carter. His uniform was gone. His once proud posture was slumped, his face gaunt, as if he hadn't slept in days. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then, he whispered, "Mia. I made a mistake." I crossed my arms, my voice steady. "I'm not interested in your regrets, Ryan." His eyes darkened. "I know. But I can." He swallowed hard, his voice breaking. "I can't let you go." I felt nothing. No anger. No sadness. Just a quiet certainty. "You already did." Ryan flinched. Silence stretched between us. And then, as if finally realizing the truth, he let out a shaky breath. I had moved on. And no matter what he said, no matter how much he begged, I was never coming back. Part 5: The Weight of Regret. The sun had nearly set, casting long shadows over the fields. The air was thick with the scent of freshly tilled soil and the distant murmur of villagers finishing their day's work. And yet, the only sound I could hear was Ryan Carter's breathing, uneven, ragged. He stood before me, his once proud posture slumped, his eyes shadowed by something I had never seen in them before. Regret. But regret meant nothing to me now. Not after everything. A door that won't open again. Ryan took a slow step forward, and instinctively, I took one back. That tiny movement made something flicker in his expression. "Mia, please," he murmured, voice hoarse. "I just need to talk." I folded my arms. "You lost that right the moment you let me walk away." He flinched, but he didn't stop. "I was wrong." His voice cracked. "I was wrong about everything." I exhaled sharply, glancing toward the village path. The last thing I wanted was for the villagers to see this, to see him. "Keep your voice down," I said coldly. "I have a reputation to protect here." Ryan let out a bitter laugh. "You thin. I came all this way to ruin your reputation?" "I don't know," I admitted. "You seem to have a habit of putting me in difficult situations." A muscle twitched in his jaw. "I never meant to hurt you, Mia." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "That's the problem, Ryan. You never meant to." "But you did." Over and over again. He took another step forward. "If I could go back." "But you can't," I cut him off sharply. "And even if you could, would you really do anything differently?" He hesitated. And that hesitation told me everything. I shook my head. "You wouldn't." Ryan's face twisted. "That's not true." I tilted my head. "If I hadn't left, if I hadn't cancelled the engagement, would you still be with Lily Shaw?" Silence. His lips parted, but no words came out. Because we both knew the truth. He wouldn't have left her. Not on his own. I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "That's what I thought." Ryan exhaled, his hands clenching into fists. "I made a mistake, Mia. A terrible one. But I realized it too late." I shrugged. "That's not my problem." He stepped closer again, his voice pleading. "Mia, I sent Lily and her son away." The words hung between us, heavy and desperate. I stared at him. "And I'm supposed to care?" Ryan swallowed hard. "I left the military. I had no choice after everything that happened." I lifted an eyebrow. "Again, not my problem." He looked at me like I had punched him. And maybe I had. Because in his mind, I was supposed to care. I was supposed to be the same woman who had on. Begged for his love. Who had once endured every humiliation just to be by his side. But that woman was gone. I had buried her the day I walked away. Ryan's breathing turned uneven. "Mia." I held up a hand. "Don't. Just stop." He swallowed hard, his shoulders shaking. I didn't pity him. I wouldn't. Because I had been in his position once, crying, begging, waiting for him to choose me. He never had. And now, I wouldn't choose him. I exhaled slowly. "Ryan, listen to me carefully." He lifted his gaze, desperate, hopeful. "I don't hate you." His lips parted slightly, a flicker of something like relief crossing his face. But then, I delivered the final blow. "I just don't care about you anymore." And that was the moment I saw something in him break. He had expected anger, resentment, even hatred. But not indifference. And indifference hurt more than any slap, more than any cruel words ever could. Ryan Carter had lost me. Completely. I turned away. "Go home, Ryan." He didn't move. didn't speak. For the first time, he was the one left standing in silence. I didn't look back as I walked away. I had done that too many times before. Never again. A future without shadows. That night, I lay in my small room, staring at the ceiling. I had thought seeing Ryan again would make me feel something. Anger. Sadness. Nostalgia. But I felt nothing. And that was the greatest victory of all. Because for the first time in 2 lifetimes, I was truly free. No more waiting. No more hoping. No more Ryan Carter. Just me. And a future I would build on my own. Part 6, The Life I Chose. The morning sun spilled through my window, warming my skin as I slowly opened my eyes. For the first time in 2 lifetimes, I woke up without regret. No weight of heartbreak. No lingering pain from a past I had been forced to endure. Ryan Carter was gone. For good. And I had never been more alive. A future worth living. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. I threw myself into my work, learning under Professor Michael Fong, one of the greatest agricultural scientists of our time. I studied tirelessly, poring over books, waking before dawn to work the fields, running experiments on soil composition, irrigation techniques, and crop rotation. The days were hard, exhausting even. But I loved every second of it. Because this was the life I had always wanted. One that belonged to me. I had spent my past life waiting for love, waiting for recognition, waiting for someone to choose me. This time, I chose myself. And for the first time, I realized. Love isn't what gives life meaning. Purpose does. The man I once knew. It wasn't until years later that I saw Ryan Carter again. By then, I had made a name for myself. I had become a respected scientist, a pioneer in agricultural research. My work had taken me to international conferences, research labs, and fields where my efforts had helped farmers increase their harvests. I had built something. A life without him. But Ryan? He had fallen apart. I saw him at a train station on a cold winter evening. His uniform was gone. His once proud posture was hunched, his face lined with years of hardship. His hands clutched a small bundle wrapped in a thin, tattered blanket. A child. A frail, sickly-looking baby who barely had the strength to cry. Ryan saw me before I could turn away. For a moment, either of us spoke. Then, he whispered, "Mia." I stared at him, at the broken man standing before me. The man who had once been so sure of his future, so convinced of his righteousness. And now? He was nothing. Ryan swallowed hard, shifting the child in his arms. "She's my granddaughter," he murmured. I blinked. "Noah's?" He nodded. After Noah died, his wife left her behind. She had no one. I couldn't let her starve. His voice was hollow, empty. I didn't feel sympathy. I didn't feel anger. I felt nothing. Ryan Carter was just a stranger now. He let out a slow, shaky breath. "I know I don't deserve to ask this, but," his hands trembled. "Can you help her?" I looked at the child. Her tiny face was pale, her lips chapped from the cold. She was innocent. I exhaled and made my choice. Not for Ryan. Not for the past. But because I had spent 2 lifetimes learning to be better. I signaled for one of my assistants. "Take them to the shelter. Make sure the child is cared for." Ryan's eyes widened. I held up a hand. I didn't do this for you. His breath caught. I met his gaze, my voice calm. I let go of you a long time ago, Ryan. And I meant it. The pain of my past life? Gone. The betrayal? The loneliness? The heartbreak? All of it had burned away, leaving nothing but peace. Ryan lowered his head. His shoulders shook, not from the cold, but from something deeper. I stepped past him, toward the life I had built, the future I had chosen. No goodbyes. No final words. Just freedom. Because in the end, Ryan Carter had been nothing more than a lesson. And I had finally learned. Epilogue, the road ahead. Years later, I stood before a classroom filled with young students, the next generation of researchers and scientists. I smiled. They reminded me of myself, eager, hopeful, ready to change the world. And maybe they would. Because I had escaped. I had rebuilt. I had thrived. Love had failed me. But effort? Purpose? Passion? Those had never betrayed me. I turn. Ed to the board, writing the words that had come to define my life. Your life is yours alone. Live it for yourself. And for the first time in 2 lifetimes, I truly believed it. Final thoughts. Mia's journey wasn't just about escaping Ryan Carter. It was about reclaiming herself, about choosing a life of meaning over one of empty love. She walked away. She won. And in the end, that's the greatest revenge of all.